Good afternoon. My name is Chioma Fanawopo, and I'll say first and foremost, I'm a mother of two boys, age 15 and 8. I'm also have over 18 years experience of working with families, children, young people in the education system, but also in the criminal justice system, and also have 3 years of experience of running a youth project in Bromley, and finally currently work heading up the youth and young adults department of a charity. Now, I am here speaking and sharing my point of view. Last time I shared a point of view on role models and the importance of that for young people, and today I'll be sharing on the recent events with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, but also racism here in the UK. It's something that I have been speaking out about quite a long time, and I know some people have been really uncomfortable with it. Some people have been sort of ignored it. Some people have felt uncomfortable with it. And 2 nights ago, I had a talk with a youth group, and it was a real open dialogue and conversation around racism here in the UK, but also the part that we can play and action points. So I'll be sharing at the end some action points. So I'll start off with sharing that in my 18 years of working, but also 20 years of living here in the UK, I'm really thankful and blessed to have a great range of friends from all different backgrounds, nationalities. And I'm really thankful that in the UK, it's the one place I can say that you meet people from countries I've never even heard of, but now curious to want to explore and know more about. So I have friends from all different parts of the world, from my white British friends to my Filipino friends to my African friends to my Caribbean friends and to my Indian friends, Pakistani friends. So a range of friendships from different parts of the world. And I love food and I love cooking. So I've been able to explore and sample and cook those foods, which I'm really thankful for. But also my family, so my husband's family, are quite diverse. So we've got said white British, we've got Filipinos, we've got from Barbados, from the Caribbean part of the family. So I think that has enriched our community, our family, but also my children. It's exposed us to a wealth of different backgrounds. I have lived in the UK for about 20 years, as I mentioned, and in the past 2 years, I have lived in the London Borough of Bexley. Previously living in Croydon, I felt Croydon was very multicultural, very diverse, and saw some parts of racism, but I feel that being in this part of Bexley, which is very much white, I feel like I have definitely had a lot more experience of racism than I had in Croydon. And it's not to say that um, it's not to say that I think I say this to share that this is why I am speaking out about this topic, and I have done for the past 2 years living in this borough. Now, yesterday or 2 nights ago, actually 2 nights ago, when I had a talk with a youth group, some of the things we're talking about, what does racism look like in the UK? So I'm going to share a few things about my experiences with racism here in the UK. Now, I want to say first and foremost that I love people, I love young people, I love parents, I love people generally, and I'm sharing this as a form of education, but as a form of listing some action points and steps that we can follow on to do better. So I'm going to share a few examples, and people might agree or disagree with me about some of these things that I'm sharing, but these are my experiences, so I'm going to share them. So the first one that I noticed is I was speaking to a friend of mine earlier this morning, a young lady that I've known, and she's going to be a mother, but she knows the headlines that says Black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth. Now, living here in 21st century UK, that shouldn't be the case because we have one of the best healthcare in the world that people come sort of from around the world to experience. And yet, those who go in, so as a new mom or about to be a new mom, she's already anxious about how is she going to experience childcare, the maternal services and maternity services rather. So speaking to her and actually reassuring her that it's not all bad, but it is important to, one, be aware she's already aware, and ensure that she takes the necessary steps. So she has people around her who will support her in her journey as a new mother. Now, the other things I've seen and experienced of racism here in the UK is in the education system. So I've worked in the education system for probably about 10 years. And I always remember this because it stays with me. A 5-year-old boy in year 1 was expelled. And at the time I thought, oh my goodness, 5. What are his opportunities if he's expelled at the age of 5? What would his future look like? And some people might disagree and say it was nothing to do with race, but it was the lack of understanding that, one, that boy had special needs and he needed support. So by expelling him, he wasn't being given the right opportunities. So he was now going to be going to a different school and moving and then ending up in a pupil referral unit for a boy that was 5, which is completely wrong. So as we know that, I feel like the education system is not always geared towards boys because boys love to be doing, whereas in the classrooms, it's more geared towards girls who are quite compliant. And it's not a generalization, but I do feel that girls seem to get on better and excel better. But when boys identify, like their learning styles are identified, they're able to flourish and soar. And I've seen that even with my boys, where I've had to sort of with my older son who's in year 10. I remember I had to unfortunately move him out of a school that I found were not addressing his basic needs. He wasn't being challenged adequately, he wasn't being stretched, and the aspiration that they were had for him wasn't really what was suitable for him. And what I've seen in his new school is that he's been able to thrive. So he was able to exceed the targets that were set for him for the end of the year by even the first term. The other things I've noticed are like the curriculum. So in my younger son's school, he goes to school and in his class he's the only black boy. Now we've come from Croydon schools where it was very multicultural. And I remember when we started at the school, I said to the business manager at the school, I said, we've come from a very diverse school. And she said, oh, we don't have racism here. And I said, well, if it does happen, I will definitely be here. And so unfortunately, a few months into my younger son's stay at the school, a boy called him Black Poo. Now, for me, some people might say that's not racism, but the boy picked his color to call him names. He could have said anything else, but he chose his color and so called him Black Poo. Now, the teacher I didn't feel dealt with it or saw the seriousness and severity of it, because just as we know with bullying, if it's not dealt with, it can quickly escalate and children can get to the point where they refuse to go to school because they're being bullied. And I really didn't want that. So I spoke to the teacher, and then I also spoke to the deputy head because I said something needed to be done. In the end, it was addressed, but there was a reason. They said my son had called him that he looked like a girl, and that was the reason why he then called him Black Poo. Now, that incident should have been reported as a racist incident, but I know it wasn't. Instead, it was just the boy was spoken to, and then the issue was resolved. But I was glad that it was resolved, even though the boy wasn't termed as a racist incident. I knew it was a racist incident. Now, and fast forward to October of last year, I approached the school at the beginning, actually September rather. So a backtrack, September, I approached the school and I said, what are you doing for Black History? Because I felt that it was important that my son saw positive representations, but celebrating the positive contributions of Black people to the UK. So his teacher asked me, because she was in charge of Black History, she asked me what did I have to offer? And I said, I would love to come in and do a session with the children, a cooking session. So I did, and I loved it, and the children loved it. So I taught on the similarity and difference between banana and plantain, and we discussed countries that plantain is found in. I shared the maps, and I also shared some African costume which they touched, and they tried the food, and at the end of it, they loved it. And the children, and I learned some things. I learned that some countries like Colombia, they also have plantain. And I also had a boy there and asking, can we go on a school trip to Nigeria? Because I shared about countries like Nigeria, the Caribbean, Colombia, where plantain is found. And he wanted to go to Nigeria. And I said, unfortunately, it's quite expensive for you to go on a school trip to Nigeria. But following that, I had teachers come up to me and children come to me saying, oh, we bought plantain from our local Asda and we've cooked it. And so I felt that it was the beginning of learning for the children about different cultures. Other things I've noticed as well is Black boys are more, and Black people are more likely to be stopped and searched. And I remember saying to my friend, who is a mom of a 16-year-old, that I had to speak to my son about stop and search. Now, I didn't speak to him about stop and search because he was a Black boy. I spoke to him because I know that, unfortunately, Black boys are more disproportionately able to be stopped and searched. And so for me, it was about empowering him. So if that was the case, he knew, one, his rights, and secondly, he knew how to interact positively with the police force. I mean, I know friends that are police constables, and also my husband was a special constable with the police. So for us, we have a very positive experience of the police, but we know that that institutionally, after the Stephen Lawrence reviewing to his death, it was said that the men were institutionally racist. So being aware of that, it made me more likely to educate my son. But also in the community that we live in, we're the only Black family on our street. So I was saying, if issues do arise, he might be mistaken for something and we might be approached. So I think for me, it was important that he was equipped with the right tools to know how to conduct himself if that was the case. And then other experiences that I've seen as well are the case of footballers and how they're depicted in the news. So we've got footballers like Raheem Sterling, who has done a lot to promote and to support children from underprivileged background, like I think it was last year, buying tickets for a game for primary school children. Now, when he's portrayed in the newspapers, unfortunately, he is portrayed quite negatively, whereas other football players who are not Black are portrayed in a much positive light. We also had recently a case where in the last couple of days, Marcus Rashford, a 22-year-old footballer, was wrongly identified and called Daniel Rashford by Matt Hancock. Now, this young man has managed to overturn the government's decision to not give school children food vouchers during the summer holidays. And we know that in the BAME community, Black and minority ethnic communities, we've been disproportionately affected by COVID. And that's meant that a lot of parents might be out of work and a lot of children might not have access to food. And so by him campaigning about it, saying that children should still receive food vouchers during the summer holidays, we know that he had saved 1.3 million children from poverty and from hunger. Now, such an achievement should have been applauded by the government, but we have Matt Hancock, who is coming up and not even correctly identifying his name and calling him Daniel Rashford. He could have searched it and found out, and it's not a criticism of him, but I think it's just identifying that his name should have been used correctly and not called the wrong name. Another instance that we have is police brutality here in the UK. We know a lot of young men that have died at the hands of the police because disproportionate amount of force have been used, and sadly they have died in police custody. So I think there needs to be a lot of training around how police should treat young men who have been stopped and searched. We had a case just during lockdown of a father who was tasered in front of his little son. Now that should not have been the case. That little boy should not have seen his dad, because I think what that might do is make him think the police are bad, because he will remember the trauma that that child will remember of their father being tasered by the police who are there to protect citizens. Another thing that I've seen is in mental health. Black men are disproportionately represented in the mental health institutions. So South London mostly has a high percentage and high rate of Black men who are sectioned, who have schizophrenia, and all the other mental health disorders. And I think as a result of sometimes not being able to access services much earlier and preventative measures are not taken to give them the right support earlier on, it means that later on they are more likely to be sectioned and misdiagnosed as well in mental health. Another thing that I've seen are also cases where young Black boys are more likely to be in pupil referral unit, again, going back to education, they're more likely to be in pupil referral unit. And a lot of these young men are gifted, talented boys, but because the learning styles were not met or they were not given the right support, they end up being expelled, they end up being excluded, and the opportunities that they get leads to them ending up from pupil referral unit to prison, and then it means that their opportunities later in life is hampered because they now have a criminal record and so can't get good jobs at the end of serving that prison sentence. So I think it's really important that we identify that, we're aware of that, and we seek to make changes. Now, I know some amazing young people who are making changes. A young lady who is 23 who has decided that she's going to help to decolonize the curriculum. So she's written to her old secondary school and she's asking them that they should decolonize the curriculum, but also they should highlight the positive contributions of Black British people here in the UK. She's called Laura Williams, and on her Twitter page, she shares about the letter, the open letter that she wrote to her secondary school. So those are some of the positive action steps that we can take, seek to address and call out the injustice that we see in our society. If we hear people saying things that might be quite offensive, that we can call them out on it and we can seek to educate and correct. So those are the steps we can educate. So I think definitely people read up. So lots of people have spoken about this. I myself, but also many other professions. So Afia Hirsch, she is a journalist. She's been writing about it. She's also written a book called British, where she speaks about her experiences, born to a white father and a Ghanaian mother, and her experiences when she went to a top university. I believe it was either Oxford or Cambridge, and her experiences there. So she speaks out about it. Also, other people, there's a journalist called Rennie Edo who's spoken out and written a book called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. So I definitely encourage people to read that. David Olusoga, he's also written a book called Black and British. So he's a British Nigerian historian. He's done some series called Black and British on BBC, can be found on our BBC iPlayer. Also, Mallory Blackman's book called Noughts and Crosses, and there was a dramatization. It's quite an informative book to read, but also TV program to watch to educate. But also the Windrush scandal is also another one where the contributions of the Windrush generation who were invited to the UK after the Second World War to help rebuild the UK, when they arrived, a lot of them saw signs that said no blacks, no dogs, and no Irish. And a lot of them were discriminated against, although they had helped to rebuild the UK, build the railways. A lot of them were bus drivers, a lot of them were nurses helping in the NHS. And yet, these same ones, years later, had lived in the UK for 50 years, were told to go back to the country. A lot of them have left when they were children because the Home Affairs had destroyed their landing cards, and also had decided that because they didn't have proof of their Britishness, a lot of them lost jobs, a lot of them lost families, a lot of them became stranded abroad. Maybe they had gone back to Jamaica to visit family and couldn't get back to the UK. And I've ended up trying to fight to be returned to the country where they've lived for the past 50 years. And so it was a big scandal. And even as we speak today, only about 20% of them have been given compensation, and sadly some of them died even before they could receive the compensation that were due to them. And so MPs like David Lammy have spoken about it, but also spoken about some of the injustices that take place in the UK. Unfortunately, people have called it race baiting, but it's not race baiting. It's an experience that affects Black people here in the UK. Other examples that I will give are MP Dawn Butler, who's been mistaken for a cleaner, although she's a MP, but also other MPs in Parliament not currently being identified, or Dawn Butler being called the name of another Marsha Cordova, who's another MP. So I think it's not something that would happen where other MPs are incorrectly identified. And I think it's important that by showing that we appreciate the contributions of these MPs, by correctly identifying their names, calling them by their names, and not calling them by other people's names. And we've seen that time and time again where people are mistaken for others. So thank you so much for listening to my point of view. And I hope that it's been valuable in helping you to educate yourself about Black Lives Matter, and about caring for people less privileged than we are. Thank you for listening.